This is Global Watch.
Hello, it's noon in Beijing and 4 a.m. GMT. Welcome to Global Watch. I'm Pan Deng.
And I'm Jiao Yang. It's also 0-hour Eastern Daylight Saving Time in Washington, D.C. And today we focus on the impact of the latest wave of U.S. heavy tariffs against the rest of the world.
We'll also take a deep and detailed look into the full picture of the shakeup that threatens to tear apart the entire global trading system established since the end of the Second World War. At this very moment, the so-called reciprocal tariffs from the U.S. government have taken effect. So how about we start by looking at market reactions so far?
Well, U.S. stocks certainly dropped on Tuesday for a fourth straight trading day, showing signs of investor anxiety.
And people within the government, the U.S. government, and prominent Republicans have also expressed their concerns. Trump's former vice president, Mike Pence, says the Trump tariff tax is the largest peacetime tax hike in U.S. history. Senator Ted Cruz expressed concerns that tariffs could lead to severe political consequences for the GOP in the 2026 midterms. Senator Rand Paul says tariffs are taxes and Americans are paying the price.
The tariff policy has exposed divisions in Trump's own administration, and it's most evident in a public dispute between government efficiency head Elon Musk and senior trade advisor Peter Navarro. A billionaire Musk, who has opposed the tariffs, called hardliner Navarro a moron, whilst Navarro branded the Tesla CEO as a car assembler who relies on imported parts. Musk says that he hopes for zero tariffs between the U.S. and Europe.
I hope it is agreed that both Europe and the United States should move, ideally, in my view, to a zero tariff situation.
The tariff shakeup is also hitting the U.S. industries, and its ripple effects, if not tsunami effects so far, are spreading around the world, from industrial and supply chains to financial markets. Countries and regions around the world are ready to respond.
Nobody wins with a trade war. Everybody tends to lose.
We can give ourselves far more than the U.S. can take away. So the U.S. is driving itself into a recession.
We think it is a bad idea and a poor response to the trade deficit.
What the U.S. is doing now is not reform. It is rejecting the very system it created.
China is ready to fight till the end if the United States disregards the interests of both countries and the international community and is bent on waging a tariff war or trade war.
Now, for more insights into this very volatile situation, we're joined in the studio by Professor Liu Baozheng and Mr. Einar Tangen. Thank you very much for joining us, gentlemen. Let me start with you, Professor. So we've just passed 0 hour of a possibly the biggest shakeup to the global trading system since the end of the Second World War. Tell us why the Trump administration decided to go ahead with this.
Well, he has a number of hypothetical assumptions. U.S. suffered a great loss in the trade deficit because the whole world are taking a free ride of the global trading platform and penetrating in the United States. So he always assumes that paying $1 for anything they really need is doing a favor to the rest of the world, and now he's going to flip the table and revel the entire system. So on that note, it's very simple that I have a lot of trade deficit with my grocery stores, with the restaurants, etc. So he's really taking a totally blind view over the fact that by exchanging goods and services around the world, that can really promote their own prosperity and giving a win-win situation for all trading partners. And he always assumes that tariff is the magic wand. He can bully any other trading partner to serve his purpose. In the end, he will deliver what he called the promise to the United States that bring jobs to America for reindustrialization and reduce trade deficit, et cetera, et cetera. But he is doing the opposite, putting the horse before the cart. So when you start with the wrong diagnosis of the situation, you definitely have a very lousy recipe or prescription to deal with the problems.
So, yes, gentlemen, we'll be getting back to you very soon on this. Now let's get more updates on the situation.
Yes, and we want to look a bit more closely at how Washington is applying these so-called reciprocal tariffs on China. Gao Yiming has more.
That's why additional tariffs on Chinese goods are in place effective midnight tonight at 104%.
Washington's tariffs on China are going through the roof. This comes as Beijing is slapping 34% tariffs on U.S. imports, a staunch countermeasure against Washington's slew of levies. The White House has confirmed the additional 50% tariffs on China are on top of its initial reciprocal tariff of 34% and the existing 20% levy. With trade tensions ratcheted up, questions are being asked about whether Washington itself can handle the fallout.
I think it's interesting that the U.S. is trying to exert a lot of influence, but by no means do they hold all the cards, not the least of which is because China is positioning itself in a very muscular kind of way to say, well, if you want a tariff war, bring it on. We're pretty sure we can weather that kind of storm.
The U.S. trade representative has given an overview of how the reciprocal tariffs on Washington's trading partners are calculated. It's summarized into what looks like a complicated mathematical formula. When you unpack this formula, it actually comes down to simple maths. Take the trade deficit for the U.S. in goods with a particular country, divide that by the total goods imported from that country, and then divide that number by 2. The U.S.'s goods deficit with China stands at about $295 billion US, and the total amount it buys from China is $440 billion. Dividing 295 by 440 comes to 67%, and divide that by 2 and round up, we get 34%. Many experts have pointed out that the White House's reciprocal methodology is not scientific or reasonable.
Personally, I've never seen it. So often tariffs are already expressed in percentage terms, and then you can just take the number from the trade bulletins or wherever they are published. Other tariffs or non-tariff barriers need to be converted into ad valorem equivalents, and there are ways how economists do that. It really depends on the measure. They're doing it based on a formula that relies on trade, looks at trade deficits or like a trade deficit ratio to imports. Personally, I've never seen that.
When he was in office, former President Ronald Reagan was hit by one of the worst recessions the U.S. had faced since the Great Depression. He fought it by promoting a free market.
Indeed, throughout the world, there's a growing realization that the way to prosperity for all nations is rejecting protectionist legislation and promoting fair and free competition. Now, there are sound historical reasons for this. For those of us who lived through the Great Depression, the memory of the suffering it caused is deep and searing. And today, many economic analysts and historians argue that high tariff legislation passed back in that period, called the Smoot-Hawley Tariff, greatly deepened the Depression and prevented economic recovery.
The United States is now backtracking on its free trade path, with analysts warning of a possible recession in the wake of America's tariff war. With global markets tumbling and the economic uncertainties increased, the future of the economy hangs in the balance. Gao Yiming, CGTN.
Well, I'm certainly no economist, but that calculation does seem to be very simple and a one-glove-fits-all approach. I know. What do you think of this way that he's calculating the tariffs? Is it justifiable?
Well, first off, he's not calculating. What it was is somebody tried to explain it to him. Donald Trump's understanding of economics is about that of an 11-year-old, as you can see here. I mean, this is something that I would expect, if I literally went to a middle school and said, okay, this is the problem, how do I solve it? Right? It has absolutely no reference to standard economics or anything like that. And you heard her say, "I've never heard of this before." Basically, she's saying it's nonsense. So let us be clear. Donald Trump is starting out with this idea that he did not develop. It was developed by somebody named Robert Lighthizer, who was a U.S. trade representative. But he put this whole thing out 12 years ago, before Trump even became president. And it was this idea that we'll use tariffs to pull industrialization back to the U.S., and then we'll devalue the dollar by 30% so that we can now be competitive globally. The problem with that is it doesn't work. But even if they did do it, if they somehow got industrialization back to the U.S. and then you devalued the U.S. dollar by 30%, I don't think people would have much faith and trust in a dollar that can be pushed up and down by the United States like that. So there would be massive losses throughout everywhere.
Indeed, sometimes it seems really fascinating how come that kind of linear thinking could become top government decisions for the world's largest economy. And this is not targeting, the so-called competitors considered by the United States like China, but also to U.S. close allies across the Atlantic, right? European Union. Professor, let me refer you to remarks.
And also penguins on the Mexican
Oh, yes. No mentioning those penguins.
Those penguins are causing a lot of economic damage.
Oh, indeed.
You're not just aware of it.
They are to blame, right?
Yes.
And going back to EU, the Trade Commissioner of the bloc, Maroš Šefčovič, said on Monday, April the 7th, that this is a black day for markets. Now, we've just passed the 0 hour of the full implementation of the US reciprocal tariffs. Do you think from this point on, it will be darker?
Well, I should say more correctly, it is a blackmail day.
Right.
Because all the world trading partner is considered to be taking a ransom by Donald Trump. And now I think over the past 2 days, the sentiment has already changed subtly from initial panic, because people were panicked not really for fear of such a tariff, but they couldn't really comprehend with any logic, with any common sense, that Donald Trump could produce such a sort of lunatic type of tariff. And then the emotional part has been settled. But in the meanwhile, many countries, they still have a heavy past dependence over the past, and they rely on the U.S. As a market. They do not have a strategy to have a plan B in terms of diversifying their trading partners. Therefore, they really wanted to leave some room for negotiation. But the issue is that this is really something, a blanket that covers every other country, and there is not really much room, even if you come up with some compromise terms, he won't accept. And plus that in the Greek theology, they said the best punishment is to ask you to fill a jar without bottom. And now, we do not know where is the bottom. He asked, like Vietnam, I said, okay, I welcome you and your wife to visit Vietnam. I want to propose zero tariff. And he said, okay, how about U.S. industrialization? How can you help us? So this really, turned by expectancy in theory, if you, by any efforts, you cannot really deliver what the other expects, you simply stop there.
Now, fingers crossed, let's hope, global trade won't become a modern time Greek mythology. Gentlemen, we'll be getting back to you very soon on this when we return on a Global Watch. And we'll take a closer look at turbulence continues to rock world markets as U.S. tariffs trigger uncertainty over economic growth all around the world. Stay with us. You're watching Global Watch on CGTN. Trump's tariffs have especially targeted U.S. traditional allies, including the European Union, Canada, and Mexico, with harsh levies on steel, aluminum, and automobiles. At the same time, developing countries could be further constrained by the disruption caused to global industrial and supply chains and wider international trade system. From April the 5th, a 10% minimum baseline tariff has applied to nearly all imports. This is in addition the already imposed tariffs on steel, aluminum, autos, and semiconductors. Today, April the 9th, the United States will escalate trade tensions with country-specific tariffs. They include the European Union with a baseline 20%, Japan at 24%, and South Korea at 25%. Among developing nations, many of whom are facing economic challenges, the highest tariff of 49% targets Cambodia.
Well, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has pledged to protect his country's auto industry.
We're doing three things. We're going to fight, we're going to protect, and we're going to build. And all of them are important. Now, we are putting tariffs on American vehicles that come into Canada and have an unfair advantage in Canada and competing with us.
Another U.S. ally considering countermeasures is the European Union, which is facing U.S. levies of 20%. French President Emmanuel Macron has called for suspending investment in the U.S. EU trade ministers have met in Luxembourg to discuss this. The EU is expected to vote on Wednesday on a proposal to impose 25% duties on some U.S. imports in response to the U.S. steel and aluminium tariffs. If it passes, the EU tariffs take effect on April 15th.
Asian stock markets from Australia to China have opened lower in early Wednesday trade as the so-called U.S. reciprocal tariffs take effect. The drop in share prices reverses a brief global rally the day before. Our reporters Shane Hum in Seoul and Ryan Mauta in Kuala Lumpur join us now with the latest on the impacts of the U.S. tariffs in the Asia-Pacific. Let me start with you, Shane. South Korea announced emergency measures for its auto sector Wednesday morning, seeking to reduce the impact of U.S. tariffs. How's that doing so far?
Yeah, the large focus is on the auto sector because obviously Korea, a very export-driven economy. In fact, 44% of the nation's entire GDP is comprised of exports, and of that, 14% is auto. So you can imagine how officials are focusing on the biggest wound, so to speak, at first. So if you look at the numbers, more than $36 billion worth of cars were exported to the U.S. last year. Add to that another $8 billion or so in auto parts. It's a very drastic sort of impact that these tariffs can have on the entire economy, and that's why the industry ministry today came out saying that they're willing to inject nearly $1.3 billion worth of emergency funds in liquidity to the global market. In addition to that, across other markets as well, $1.5 billion in emergency finance across all other sectors, including autos, semiconductors, steel, and batteries as well. Also, state-run banks will be offering easier loans and emergency loans for small and medium-sized enterprises, and more subsidies for electric vehicles to help this auto industry try and really trying to cushion sort of the impact in the short term, so to speak, short-term sort of range, because the long-term effects right now in terms of what the government can do. In fact, the trade minister is in Washington this week for talks with the U.S. trade representatives to try and find a way to get exemptions or waivers or lower tariff rates in general. And that comes on the heels of the very first communication yesterday we had the acting president, Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, speak with U.S. President Donald Trump. And that's sort of the focus that the officials here have to be working on, because it looks like exemptions with the current free trade agreement are also not on the agenda at this point.
Thank you very much. Our correspondent Shane Hum in Seoul.
Well, let's now bring in Ryan Meltzer, who's in Kuala Lumpur. Ryan, so we're now looking at the Southeast Asian region. What kind of impact will Trump's tariffs have on ASEAN's supply chain?
Yes, well, the ASEAN countries have seen some of the largest tariff increases of any countries on earth. 4 of the countries face tariff increases of between 44 and 49%. 2 of the countries, Indonesia and Thailand, are in the 30s, and Malaysia is going to be hit with a 24% tariff as it stands right now. And these countries are all very heavily integrated into the global supply chain with China and with Western countries, especially in the electronics sector. Probably none more so than Vietnam, whom economists speculate will be probably the hardest hit out of all the countries. But not only Vietnam, other countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, the Philippines have seen a lot of offshoring of segments of the global supply chain, especially in electronics, over recent years. So they're expecting some serious hit to the disruption to those supply chains. However, it seems that when it comes to countries like Malaysia, the Philippines, a large percentage of the exports to the US are semiconductor linked, and those may well be exempt from the tariffs. However, it's not only a worry about how it will affect suppliers here that are supplying the supply chain in the US, but also to China, the #1 trading partner of the ASEAN region. Any major hit to China's economy, of course, a drop in demand from China will affect the suppliers here. So there's a great concern about not only the direct impact of trading with the US, but the indirect impact on ASEAN's major trading partners. But so far, the ASEAN leaders are taking deep breaths. They're not spouting a lot of angry rhetoric. They're not imposing any kind of reciprocal measures. They're just hurrying to the phone or hurrying to arrange trade delegations in the case of Malaysia to contact the US and see how they can reduce these tariffs through negotiation. But for some of these countries, it's a really pitiful situation. You have Laos, one of the least developed countries in the region, being hit with nearly a 50% tariff. And it doesn't run a trade deficit with the US because it has tariffs on US products. It has it because it's a poor country that can't afford to import a lot from the US. So there's certainly going to be massive ramifications in this region and disruption to supply chains.
Thanks so much for the update, Ryan Meltzer in Kuala Lumpur.
Now, for more insights, let's go back to our studio guest. I know we just heard a situation from Southeast Asian nations talking about the impact on global industrial and supply chains. How about we start from that very specific region? Many economies there depend heavily on export-oriented economic activities, and from this very moment on, it's almost impossible to do things like diverting or bypassing the earlier US tariff restrictions or things like that. So what do you make of the whole impact so far?
Okay, let's draw back a little bit. All right, the global supply chain is being interrupted by the United States. All right, so things are going to get more expensive. What has been the reaction? Well, in the US, the tariff is a tax. All right. Other countries are responding by taking taxpayer monies to try to soften the blow. What does that mean? That means they don't use that money for infrastructure, for social programs, for development, for investment. They're simply giving money to businesses so that they don't collapse. That means that you're severely restricting investment, trade, and in the future, this is going to affect demand. So we're on a downward spiral, all right? That is going to affect everybody. But first and foremost, it's going to affect the United States. There is no way that Donald Trump can do this and expect in 2 months that the American people are going to be happy. Already, just a few hours ago, Pew released a survey that before he imposed these tariffs, when he was talking about it, 52% of Americans opposed it. And this is going to continue to drop. So if he continues on this way, it's a bluff. He can't sustain it. And this is the part I don't understand. All the cards are on the table. Everybody knows what cards the US has. Everyone knows the cards that China has and every country has. So bluffing doesn't make sense because you see, it's like, I have 4 aces. No, you don't. I can see your hand. You don't have 4 aces. What on earth are you thinking? And this is this kind of disconnect. People just feel like, well, how far is he willing to go if he's doing this kind of nonsensical stuff? So strategic patience. You have 3 different reactions. 1, appease. Get down on your knees, do what Justin did, for Canada, but that didn't work out very well.
Because you don't know where the bottom is, as Professor
Exactly.
just mentioned.
You're willing to give that? Well, I want more.
Yeah.
All right. Well, how dare you? You're not offering everything I want. That was very apparent when Trump was asked about the European. If we go to 0-0, he said, no, that's not enough. I want more. They've cheated us. We're a victim nation. The most powerful country on earth is a victim. Places like Laos where they can't always feed themselves.
As Ryan was saying, all these countries in ASEAN sending delegations for trade.
Yes, and the last part is those who are doing nothing. Not last. Second is those who are doing nothing. They're just saying, look, we're not going to oppose anything. We're just going to sit tight, wait for this to blow over. Then there's one country that's standing up. That's China.
Calling bluff.
Calling the bluff. And it is a bluff. And when other nations realize and start assessing this in the cold, hard light of day, all right, I think you're going to start to see countries not necessarily coming together collectively, but regionally and say, enough is enough. You want to do this? Okay, we're going to put the pressure back on you so that we end this quickly.
But see, this is what it leaves me wondering, what recourse is there aside from, as you say, countries banding together to address this? Because, there is the World Trade Organization, but...
Kick them out. No.
But the US is already reducing its financial contributions.
But
it's detaching itself from...
But
I've
written extensively about this. All it takes is 3/4 of the 166 countries to say, the U.S., you're out. What happens then? The WTO can be reconstituted to take care of trade for the rest of the world. The U.S. becomes an isolated pariah, a rogue state, right? Unable to join in. And at that point, I think the writing is on the wall.
So it's about forcing America's hand then?
Absolutely.
What's your take on this, Professor?
Well, he's getting reckless. Actually, if you resort to the art of war of the Chinese wisdom, the first advice is that you make yourself strong until the enemy, gets their 40. Now, the simple layman analogy is that the mom goes out and buy a pair of boots for their kids, and the father stands at the gate. Now, how much did you pay for it? 100. Then, okay, give me 50, and you pay me in order to bring the boots to the kids. So this is really ridiculous. When someone is getting lunatic, you just wait instead of respond. I think that's the strategic patience that is required of the whole world. And the other thing is that he just takes personal joy to satisfy his narcissistic ego. So when he really flipped the table, he doesn't even know where is the ending scenario. And then the whole world will have to counteroffer to a black hole that he set up. And also he set up a sort of prisoner's dilemma where he plays information asymmetry. And if the others go for appeasement, and then he will pick the one that is last to stick his neck, and throw all the blame on this one that is really retaliating. It seems that at the moment it's apparent China is the one that he's going to fix his target on. But if you look at the situation, China's situation is very different because you add up his legacy in his first term over the tariff on China and everything else over fentanyl related, etc. Now it's 89%. If it really pushes to 50 at this time around, that's over 100%. Yeah. So China now is now in the corner. So there's no room for further bargaining unless he is really to have a turnaround, but China will not really push to have a turnaround. I think the whole world and also the U.S. constituencies are going to, spin his head.
Well, gentlemen, thank you. We'll continue our discussion just a bit shortly. A look at what's coming up next in our special coverage on the U.S. tariffs, where economists and top business leaders have warned of the fallout from these policies on the U.S. economy. So when we return on Global Watch, we review the concerns and protests from within the United States. Stay with us.
So the so-called US reciprocal tariffs are not just impacting the global economy, they're also hitting the United States itself. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has warned Trump's tariffs are, quote, teeing up a nationwide recession. Meanwhile, US companies that rely heavily on imports are feeling the strain of rising costs and supply chain disruptions. Demonstrations erupted in Washington, D.C. and across the United States as thousands condemned the policies of President Donald Trump and the economic fallout.
Well, as you said, US companies heavily reliant on imports are feeling the pain. Shares of tech giant Apple have plummeted 23% since last week. Apple has lost its title as the world's most valuable company. That title now belongs to Microsoft, whose shares also took a hit, dropping around 7%. Higher income Americans have lost trillions of dollars in value from their stock portfolios. But the direct effects of tariffs will fall hardest on low and middle income Americans who spend greater proportions of their incomes on food, clothes and consumer goods subject to duties. The Yale Budget Lab shows each average American household will spend another $3,800 more. Automotive consultant Alex Partners said tariffs will add $60 billion in cost to the industry, much of which is likely to be passed on to US consumers.
The American people have begun stocking up or bulking buying daily necessities amid concerns prices will surge significantly. Nita Soledad Perez in Florida checks out the scene at a grocery store in downtown Miami.
Some U.S. consumers are rushing to buy foreign-made goods before tariffs kick in. Economists are warning that this recent tariffs announced by President Trump would likely increase prices on everyday items. At this grocery store in downtown Miami, local sentiment is mixed.
Well, I've been preparing very well because I come here every day to pick up everything I can before these prices go up. It's going to be terrible. I believe in my heart, I grew up in New York. In 1960 to the 70s, the recession happened when people went out in the streets, started burning places, and I couldn't even come out. My mother wouldn't even let me come out. It's going to be worse.
It's awful. It's calling survival. I'm going to survive, I don't know. It's already expensive.
What are you going to do?
Keep on pinching pennies. What else can I do? Can't do anything.
Some view these tariffs as part of President Trump's negotiation strategy, aimed at encouraging other countries to open their economies further to American exports. Now, other shoppers also believe these measures will ultimately benefit their wallets.
It's very complicated. Let's see the results because he says it's going to work out at the end.
I know he's raising the tariffs so he can lower taxes, right? Something like that. That's the goal. I just have to see how that works out, you know. I would like to have all my taxes given to me at the end of the year.
But regardless of strategy, what many fear the most is the economic uncertainty spreading through global markets will likely increase the prices, even if it's only in the short term. Nita Soledad Perez, CGTN, Miami.
Now let's get back to our guests in the studio. Einar, so I want to ask you about what Trump is claiming here on what he's doing, why he's putting these tariffs in place. And one of them is to protect American manufacturing. He's talking about making America great again, making America rich. The validity of this claim, talk us through this a bit.
11-year-old economics. Okay, that's all I can say. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, but it's a lot of, it follows a pattern. Donald Trump has talked about reforming healthcare for 18 years. He says Obamacare is terrible. I have a beautiful plan. I have a beautiful plan. Just before the election, they asked him, please tell us about your, medical program that you're going to pass, the beautiful one. Well, I have a framework of concepts. All right. The same thing happened with Kim in North Korea, when they actually showed up, and and Kim said, "Okay, what are we going to do?" Right? Nothing. So, I mean, Donald Trump is very good at causing a lot of commotion, redirecting everyone's attention, but he doesn't have a plan, as you pointed out. There is no logical conclusion. For us to sit here and try to figure out something that's nonsensical is nonsensical itself. We can talk about what's going to happen. The American public is going to be hit hard by these things. Let's say you're somebody who's not very wealthy. You're struggling to survive. You don't buy a new car. What do? You have to buy parts for your old car. Guess what? Those are going to be 100% or at least that, because a lot of those parts are made here in China. So there's going to be a tremendous amount of pain. Even before this election, over 70% thought that they were living paycheck to paycheck. The amount of defaults on everything from student loans, credit card debt, which is at a record high, all right, personal defaults, business default, bankruptcies, and people missing payments on their houses are all at record highs. Do you think adding $3,800 average is going to impact the lower income people even more? That this is going to help? These same people who thought that he was their savior. You heard that young man. Well, he's tariffs and lower my taxes. How's that going to work out? The tariff is a tax. How can I increase your tax and then lower it? It doesn't make any sense. He's promising that in the future, all right, industry's going to return to America and everyone's going to have good paying jobs. But how is that possible? You know, how can they pay people that amount of money and expect to compete against areas like Bangladesh, India, other places where labor is a lot cheaper? It doesn't make any sense. So us sitting here trying to dissect it isn't going to add any light. It's just, we know the results. It's not going to be good. It's not going to be good for the U.S. consumers or the rest of the world.
And Professor, still doing reality check on the United States, the equities market, looking at the situation of the U.S. stock market, commodities, futures market. How long do you think Trump can actually sit through this kind of fluctuation?
You pointed two layers of the issue. So in terms of the commodity, the real goods, actually consumers do not feel the full pinch yet because the global business community, in anticipation of the tariff hike, they put a lot of stock before the reciprocal tariff was in place into the United States. So therefore, they still maintain some of the contract prices, etc. But when those inventories are really running out, and U.S. consumers definitely will feel a radical pinch out of that. The capitalists are more sensitive in the Wall Street. So therefore, they read, one is that U.S. does not really lead to any type of logical prosperity as promised by the Donald Trump, and he asked them to take the medicine for a while. It's a painful gain, but they do not really want to take such a medicine. Otherwise, they get addicted to such a medicine, and they feel more and more lunatic over that. So smart investors are either holding their money, or they are considering to divert investment in somewhere else. And now, at the moment, the whole world, the financial market is in a volatile adjustment situation. But in the end, people are going to see, how the stock market is going to have a real return on investment in certain areas because it's a liquidity platform. So right now, we see that some of the dust is getting settled actually in China. And many other big economies with the right type of economic policy at home, and also with the international trade policies with other partners, will really be the more attractive points for those the sensitive capitals to really build their new nest and lay their eggs over there.
Professor Liu, I want to go back to one of the first things you said about why Trump is doing all this. And you said it was to correct this trade deficit that he keeps talking about. But is a deficit in reality such a bad thing?
Yeah, I was saying that I have a deficit with the grocery stores. And we all have great deficit with the rural farmers because we do not really directly pay to the individual pocket of those farmers. But our life gets better because that's the basic common sense of division of labor, and people specialize in their work, and they work out certain rules so that people can really reciprocate in a beneficial way to each other instead of simply you do it on your own. So Milton Friedman made a very simple analogy using a pencil. Mm-hmm. You know, how many countries are involved, how many sectors, how many different type of skills are involved simply to make a pencil. So that's a very as simple as that. And now, you know, he totally denies one is the basic economic logic, and then also that the U.S. is committed to 3.3. As a ceiling MFN tariff to the WTO, and now he totally take restless disregard over the basic commitment, and also the fact that over the Joe Biden administration, they are talking about not only reshoring but also friendshoring, and now his so-called friend are also being taken stabbed in the back. Because when the trade war between the United States and China was launched by Donald Trump during his first term, and many investors said, okay, let's invest somewhere else and reallocate some of the production facilities, etc.
Right.
Now with the blanket tariff.
Exactly.
So
and what about American people, Mr. Tangen, as we just reported?
Nowhere to go.
Exactly, and the American people are actually protesting. It's not only about the American people, but it's also about some senior members of the GOP itself, right?
Well, yeah, there are divisions within the party. You were playing earlier. People are coming out and saying, look, this is nonsense. We can't do this. This is unsustainable. Originally, everyone just assumed that these were negotiation tactics because, who in the right mind would do something like this? It doesn't make sense.
War against the world.
Yeah, and now all of a sudden people are doing it. But I go back to what you said. All right, when the American public feels the full impact of these, you're going to see these protests multiplied by 100.
Right, and since we're talking about this, Americans are actually bracing for higher prices on a wide range of consumer goods following President Donald Trump's move to impose sweeping tariffs against basically the rest of the world. Many fear price hikes on everyday items over the next 6 months.
Basically, eggs, like simple things like eggs, simple things like mangoes, things that we get, pineapples, things that we get imported, is going to be more expensive for us. So me, like a low-class working citizen, is going to be $15 for some eggs. Like, that's more than a trip to work back and forth 3 days. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's horrible. It's horrible for us.
I believe that everything is going to go up because at the end of the day, America consists of outside. So we can't stop what's coming in and increase. People don't understand in America that we don't make anything here. Everything's imported.
There is two different type of people. People who got money, they could do that, but it's not a lot of people afford to go spend, an extra $1,000 or $500 in food. So it's not everybody could do that.
There are things in America that we use on the daily, that we consume on the daily, like coffee. That you cannot grow here. We don't have the actual climate. You can't create an eco-climate to buy coffee.
I think it's just going to make everything way more expensive and slow down global trade.
I mean, everything's going up. Nothing's going down.
We're talking about
only thing that's going down is the money.
It affects everything. It trickles down to everything, and it makes all of our costs go up, and it's not fair to the other countries either.
But stay with us on our special coverage on the U.S. tariffs coming up next. China's world's second largest economy has managed to post significant growth despite bearing the brunt of U.S. tariffs for years. Beijing says it won't back down. That's coming up.
China is a major trading partner of the United States. It says it will not back down from U.S. tariff threats and will take countermeasures to safeguard its rights and interests. For more on that, we're joined in the studio by our colleague Chen Lanyu. Good to see you there, Lanyu. Bring us up to date on the China reaction so far.
Yes, Pandan. Well, China says it's ready to fight till the end. That's its main message after U.S. President Donald Trump threatened an additional 50% tariff, bringing the total tariffs on Chinese imports to 104%. The Chinese Commerce Ministry urged the United States to correct its wrongdoings, cancel all unilateral tariffs, stop its economic suppression, and settle differences with China through dialogue based on mutual respect. The Chinese foreign minister said the U.S. indiscriminate imposition of tariffs violates the legitimate rights and interests of other countries and the WTO rules. It has damaged the multilateral trading system and impacted global economic stability. Premier Li Qiang said U.S. tariffs are a typical case of unilateralism, protectionism, and economic bullying. The premier said China is not only safeguarding its own sovereignty, security, and development interests, but also defending international trade rules. He said protectionism leads to a dead end. The right path is openness and cooperation.
Well, Lanyu, China will want to be reassuring the market. What measures is it taking?
Well, Zhao Yang, last Friday, China said it will match the U.S. tariffs with a corresponding 34% tariffs on all U.S. imports from April 10th. We also saw countermeasures. The Ministry of Commerce and General Administration of Customs imposed export controls on processing technologies for 7 medium and heavy rare earth minerals. Beijing filed a complaint on the U.S. tariffs with WTO's dispute settlement mechanism. It also added 11 U.S. companies, including military technology firms, to its unreliable entity list. It has also implemented measures to stabilize the capital market and restore investor confidence. Chinese stock markets saw a respite on Tuesday from a global sell-off thanks to coordinated moves by state-owned investment firms and enterprises. Central Huijin Investment has increased its holdings of exchange-traded funds. China Reform Holdings has invested 80 billion yuan, or about $11 billion in state-owned enterprises, tech firms, and exchange-traded funds. Over 100 Chinese SOEs have rolled out share purchase initiatives, underscoring their confidence in China's long-term economic prospects. State-owned petroleum, chemicals, electronics tech firms have increased their investments in shares, totaling over 10 billion yuan, or over $1.4 billion. Analysts say these coordinated moves are a clear signal on China's resolve to support the capital markets. And that's all I have for now. Back to you, Pandan and Zhao Yang.
Lanyu, thank you so much. The CGTN's Wu Bian spoke to the CEO of the U.S. Soybean Export Council, Jim Sutter, who shared his insights on how these tariffs will impact soybean exports.
Obviously, we don't like to hear about tariffs in any way. I mean, I think when you see a 34% tariff put on U.S. soybeans going to China, as we saw in the last trade war, it's not good. We don't see many U.S. soybeans going because the market prices in soybeans, a 34% spread or 34% sort of penalty on U.S. soybeans is so large that it will likely keep U.S. soybeans out of China, which we think is very sad because we believe that customers in China want U.S. soybeans and they'd like to be utilizing U.S. soybeans. And we know our farmers and our trade, our industry, would like to be supplying U.S. soybeans. So we're hopeful that these tariffs will be a short-lived event and we'll be able, as I mentioned before, to get back to that sort of phase one-like agreement, a phase two or a new and improved phase one or something like that.
So, gentlemen, let's talk about China's response so far. Professor, explain to our global viewers China's stance and exact countermeasures so far.
Diplomatically, we have to respond because we're the largest economy after the United States, and also China has a number of cards they can play. First, people are, and also business communities are supporting the government decisions. And then we also have a very complex industrial supply chain at home. And in the meanwhile, we do enjoy good partnership with more than 180 countries around the world in terms of trade and investment, etc. However, we also need to take into consideration that just as the whole world blames the United States, tariff can really hurt your own consumers, can hurt your own industries. So we need to make careful calculation and where and how the Chinese business communities and consumers are getting hurt. I think China is really taking a measured approach towards that to show your attitude. But in the meanwhile, we take care of our own business and the consumer, and then we found ways to team up more with other global trading partners so that we can really mitigate some of the volatilities that the reciprocal tariff creates for China and also all trading partners.
I know earlier you mentioned about these three approaches that countries are sort of divided into against the US, but China is able to call the US's bluff and stand up to it because, as you both mentioned, it's got cards to play. So this sort of somewhat global alliance of countries against the US here, is this realistic? How likely is that?
Well, it's not likely until people realize that the U.S. has no cards, that there is no basis for this. It's the bottomless pail. Right now, if the WTO were to come back, there would be rationality in the world. If the U.S. doesn't want to be part of it, that's the U.S. decision. But having 3/4 of the world, given that it would be far less than the 180 countries that he has, in essence, attacked with a trade war, it would seem mathematically to make sense. Then you can get back to a situation where when you have a dispute, you simply go to a dispute resolution entity, the WTO, and things are better. We need to return to rationality, not irrationality.
Well, gentlemen, we'll be getting back to you on this, coming up on this special coverage. History has shown tariffs do more harm than good. When we return, we discuss what lies ahead for the world as the US wages its trade war. Stay with us.
And now we take a look at the United States' history of protectionist trade policies and their impact. Nathan King has this report.
Before William McKinley became US President, he led the Tariff Act of 1890 in Congress to counter the high cost of imports. The tariffs protected workers in industries like wool and tin, but higher costs were passed on to consumers. But free trade came back into fashion following economic and financial slumps. Then came the Great Depression of 1929 and pressure to protect farming and factory jobs. Lawmakers passed the Smoot-Hawley Act, signed into law by President Herbert Hoover in 1930. Tariff rates in some cases were over 60%. Many economists say the tariffs made the Great Depression worse and triggered a global trade war.
The money supply in the United States has actually shrunk and contracted since the summer of 2022. And that shrinkage means that eventually the economy will start slowing down. We might even have a recession. That happened, of course, in 1929 at the start of the Great Depression. Then you had in June of 1930, the Smoot-Hawley tariffs came in, and that was a crowning blow that really sent us spiraling into a Great Depression.
When Franklin D. Roosevelt became president, he led the New Deal, wide sweeping reforms to stabilize the economy. Exports expanded, and US cars and thousands of consumer staples dominated Western economies. There were economic shocks along the way, including the OPEC oil embargo and President Nixon's decision to delink the dollar from gold in the 1970s. Some economists say these new Trump tariffs are higher than the McKinley-era ones or the Smoot-Hawley Act in 1930. But with anything in the Trump administration, things can change quickly. So this latest chapter on the history of US and tariffs has yet to be written. Nathan King, CGTN, at the White House.
Well, Professor, from the history of tariffs to the real-time unfolding event of U.S. tariffs and to the outlook of the future of the global economy, we've talked so much about it. So for the global south, the majority of developing nations, how could they work together to deal with headwinds, if not tsunamis, like this?
Well, people have to realize that you're bidding into a black hole, and there won't be any sort of successful end to it. But you may really receive certain benevolence, quote unquote, for a moment by capitulating to his bully. But in the end, you lose more of the trading opportunities with other partners. So it is still very realistic that the world really can stand up to defend the global trading system like WTO and push for further reform and eliminate the stumble or the roadblock created by the United States in the dispute settlement system, and make more of the majority decision instead of doing consensus simply because one country is blocking the decision of 164 countries. That's really ridiculous. So the other is that we really deepen our rule building process to get more institutionalized in the Belt and Road countries with the expanded BRICS, and also that to see that China and EU, whether we can really restart the discussion over the bilateral investment treaty, etc. So it is really high time people realize the potential harm if they really gets splitted. So
it's high time to cooperate.
That's right.
Right.
Well, I know in Donald Trump, some people, analysts are saying that he wants to create this new global economic order, and it does seem like some countries are making concessions and helping them realize this. But would this be lasting, and what should this economic order look like?
No, I mean, you have a very stark contrast of views. You have Donald Trump, who pushes this idea that the world needs to fit into America's system. And then you have China, which believes that China should fit into a global system. Obviously at odds. Donald Trump thinks that, oh, he's the smart one. I'm going to get things from people. But, people remember, and this is the problem. There's no way that this can continue. You cannot take on the entire world. The United States is not 50% of the world's GDP the way it was 60, 70 years ago. It is part of the world, a substantial part. And I agree, at some point there has to be talking. But that happens only when Donald Trump realizes his bluff has been called.
Well, gentlemen, thank you both so much for your insights. Really appreciate having you here. Einar Tangen with the Taihe Institute and Chairman of Asian Narratives, and Professor Liu Baocheng with the University of International Business and Economics.
So, from global supply chains to local industries, the impact of those U.S. tariffs is unfolding in real time. U.S. allies are frustrated, developing nations are struggling, and the backlash is growing within the United States itself.
And amid warnings of a world recession, rising costs for businesses and public protests, the big question remains, how far will this trade war go, and who will bear the ultimate cost?
One thing, I think it's fair to say that one thing at the moment is clear. It's not just about tariffs. It's about the future of multilateral trading system and the whole global economy. As tensions rise, the world watches closely to see what happens next. And as always, CGTN will keep you updated. With that, we end this edition of special coverage on CGTN. I'm Pan Dong in Beijing.
And I'm Jia Yang. Thank you so much for watching. Do stay tuned.